Beta Upsilon Chi, Bucks presents Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove, and today we welcome Diederik Hoogstraten. He is the writer of the new Young Washington movie, has an incredible story, and we're going to get right to our interview with him. Diederik, welcome to Man to Men.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Well, as I mentioned, as we were pre-gaming, I did get to see an early screening of Young Washington, but before we get to that, I want some of our men to understand who you are because you've got an incredible story. You're born and raised in the Netherlands, came to the U.S. for school, eventually became a journalist writing about America and the entertainment industry, and somewhere in there, you fell in love with this country enough to become an American citizen. What did you see as an outsider looking in and as a storyteller that made you want to belong to this American story?
Love the framing of that question. Thank you for putting it so beautifully. I sometimes say I have an accent. I'm clearly not from here. However, I have kids who wear cowboy boots to church in Texas. So we are fully here. We are assimilated. It is correct. I grew up in the Netherlands. I came here in my early 20s as a college student. I should back up just for a moment. I think you'll appreciate this. I grew up in a very progressive family in a socialist country without God, without much of a moral compass, if I may say so. But I got to watch Alex P. Keaton, Family Ties, on TV in black and white. And that opened my eyes to something about America, something about Ronald Reagan, something about the principles of this country. It truly opened my eyes. And I bring that up because now I have the privilege of working in entertainment, of telling stories, of conveying values that many of us believe in. And just to show you and to show your listeners that sort of the power of storytelling in our culture to this day, I think is rests in part, and it's a great responsibility for people like us, I think, in entertainment. Anyway, my eyes were opened once I got to New York, before it went to the place where it is now. I want to say in the 1990s, it was a different place, and fell in love with the city, and more importantly with the country, with the people, with its virtues and values. And of course, I've always seen from the very beginning that it's flawed. I learned its history and realized there's some deep flaws there. But among countries, if you've lived anywhere else, I think it's safe to say this is the place to be. This is the freest, most wonderful country in the world. I'll defend that. The best day of my life after my wedding and the births of my children was September 2nd, 2019, when I'd lived here close to 20 years, but I finally became a U.S. citizen. I got to raise my hand and say the oath, and it is indescribable. You know, my kids will never understand that. They were born here. For me, it's just a very powerful testament to what this country represents. And then I'm sure we'll get into it, but to then have someone like me who chose to be in this country with his whole heart, to then be able to tell the origin story of sort of the original American. It's been a wild ride and an incredible privilege, frankly.
Right. Oh, that's a beautiful story. Man, you were an incredible writer. I got to experience some of that in Young Washington, but also you've been a part of, honestly, a film slate that's strikingly consistent with Godsmuggler. That's Brother Andrew smuggling Bibles across,
Correct.
The iron or behind the Iron Curtain, and then tortured for his faith. And that's about a Bulgarian pastor who was jailed for 13 years for refusing to renounce his faith. There's some themes here. These are stories of faith under real physical pressure. I think you see some of that in Young Washington as well. What draws you specifically to those kinds of stories? Not faith as comfort, but faith as the thing that's being tested.
Yes. Man, that is the best question I've had so far. 2 for 2. Thanks, Jared. I know I really appreciate that because it's so interesting that while my father was a minister, he sort of drifted away from his faith as he became a more fully formed adult. And then I was raised essentially without the Christian faith. Only later did I turn to it by the side of my incredible wife, Kelly. I really, I've heard it said that both my wife and Jesus saved me, and I think that's sort of how I might frame it. And it's interesting, once I opened myself up to that reality, as I just described it, I think these stories started to come to me. So if that's not God at work, I don't know what is. It's similar to the early years of George Washington. When you look at it objectively, I want to say, just even as a non-believer, you would have to say there is a divine hand guiding that process. And not to compare myself at all to President Washington, but to say once I was open to this, these projects came to me. That includes John Irwin to work on Young Washington. That includes the incredible producer Darren Moorman. Many of your listeners will know his films if you look him up. And he and I have been working on those two projects you mentioned, God Smuggler and Tortured for His Faith. They're both in development. They're both going to come. And it was just an incredible experience to work on these stories of men of deep faith who, especially in the case of Brother Andrew, it didn't come naturally to him. He had to go through so much, through a lot of darkness and a lot of tragedy, as your listeners might know, before he came to Jesus and truly became a man of faith. And I think that journey, that transformation is what interests me. I mean, any hero's journey, any good hero's journey is about that. It's about literally a journey. And as they teach you in film school, throw everything you have at your main character. Everything. When he's down, kick him. Like your character needs to go through so much so that we, the viewers, care deeply, love him, root for him, want him to be redeemed. And that's, I believe, by the way, that's why a lot of films nowadays in Hollywood lack that latter part. They miss the redemption. Yeah. And then you're left hanging and you're still in the darkness. Yeah. And that doesn't work for most of us. I firmly believe that that's not what storytelling is about. And thankfully, John Irwin doesn't believe that either.
No.
We need that redemptive arc. We need to get to the point. And it doesn't necessarily mean a happy ending. It just means that there is truth and beauty at the end of that film. And you're leaving the movie theater with a sense of accomplishment and a sort of appreciation for what you've just gone through with your main character. And I would certainly say that the men, they're all men in this case. In the other two movies that you mentioned, they've gone through hell and back, but they come out on the other side. And that's always the point, I think.
Well, you certainly didn't protect our soon-to-be first president in young Washington at all. I was amazed at the paces you put him through. And I'd like to think of myself as generally astute on most American history, at least the major parts. And I learned things in the film. So what drew you? How did you come into contact, particularly with this portion of Washington's life? Because there's not a president or really an America anywhere in sight yet. This is my sons watched it with me. And they said it almost feels like Washington Begins. It feels like the first of a trilogy. Like we're just getting introduced to this man, and we really enjoyed it. But what drew you to this particular episode and season of a very young George Washington's life, and what made you want to write about it?
Kudos to your sons. If I tell John Irwin, my director, that some young viewers thought of an alternative title, Washington Begins, he might be slapping his head like, why didn't I think of that? That is wonderful.
Well, it was kind of, it's kind of the Batman trilogy idea.
Yes, of course. And
Washington Returns might be next. But,
yes, and Washington Returns is a possibility.
It was great.
Because, listen, when people see this film, they genuinely and generally feel they need to ask, when's the sequel coming?
Man,
and why did you stop?
You guys left me wanting more. You really did.
Right. Why did you stop in 1755? It's John and I started to talk about this question of why do we love a great man like George Washington? And we know he's on the dollar bill. We know he was very important during the Revolution, and he was our first president, and he abdicated power voluntarily. And there's a lot there we know about his character, his humility. And then the question is still, why? How did he become that way? John Irwin is deeply interested in origin stories. You've seen it in House of David.
I do see that.
There's show on Amazon.
There. Yeah.
Yes. So this question of, okay, George Washington is a statue, is an enigma a little bit. He's on the dollar bill. But who was the man? Now, we can't fully answer that question. It was the 1750s. There's not a lot of writing or letters, documents that survived. But what we do know, we felt was enough to sort of weave this story, this coming of age story. And we started at age 11 because he lost his father, and obviously a deeply traumatic event for any child. Then we follow him until he's about 22, 23, and he really lands his first command as the first militia, a regulated militia out of Virginia is formed, first in the colonies. We believe that sets him up for the journey towards 1776. But the formative experiences that you alluded to are so compelling, are so exciting, are so difficult to watch at times.
It was,
Frankly, it was
yes,
difficult to write.
yes.
As you can imagine, once we started to really delve into these biographies, I realized what he must have gone through. In part, it's romantic and it's beautiful. He goes off into the wilderness by himself. The frontier, of course, was Western Pennsylvania at the time. We're not even talking, west of the Mississippi, but it was wild and it was unknown. And he is told, George, are you sure you want to go? Most men we send do not return. He still says, send me, I want to go. So he's a man of confidence and of courage. Incredible endurance. That was appealing. I did some endurance running. I loved seeing him endure sort of the physical part of it. But ultimately, I think what John wanted to do, this was long before the 250th anniversary really came into our minds, was to write a love letter to America by making us love the original founder even more. That's sort of how I think he would frame it. And so he engaged me and my friend Tom Provost, my fellow writer, on this to explore what made him who he was, to make him fully human in as much as we can. And we always say we're not historians. This is our interpretation of what we think plausibly history looked like. The historians that John has been consulting, and that's the Wonder Project, the production company, was very careful to bring him on board. They've been supportive. They've given the green light basically on every choice we've made. That said, it's still there's a lot of creative license there. It's an interpretation, obviously, of what we know.
Man to Men is made possible in part by our partners at Southern Seminary. Guys, if you're sensing a call to ministry, you already know that's a serious calling. The question is how you'll respond with faithfulness. That's why Southern Seminary has created a resource to help you think through your next steps. At sbts.edu/called, you'll find biblical wisdom for discerning your calling and encouragement for following God's direction. And when you're ready to prepare, Southern Seminary is here with the Master of Divinity, the trusted degree designed to ground you in God's Word and equip you for a lifetime of ministry. So, if God's stirring in your heart for gospel service, take the first step. Visit sbts.edu/called and begin preparing to answer His call with faithfulness. I hear you. And I wanted to dive into that a little bit because you're coming at this with a journalist's instinct. There's a trained demand for accuracy in your work, for the real story. How did that shape how you write? The faith of Washington, the providence aspect is something that really is highlighted in the writing in this film. Without some of those historical facts, or maybe even some of those historical blanks, or the faith aspect feeling forced.
On the one hand, the limited sort of factual information that we have from that era could feel as an intimidating factor, sort of constraining. But we decided to turn it around and see it as a liberating element. These are the sort of the little milestones that we know about. And now let's start filling that in a dramatic sense while we create that narrative arc. We don't really know how, I think, the young Washington related to the Bible, to his faith, to God. We do know that his mother was a devout Anglican woman, like most people were in colonial Virginia. We know she strongly believed. We know that she talked about it with him and her other children. And so we chose his mom, Mary, as the person to really speak faith over him, to talk about God, talk about a divine hand and providence, to give him courage also from that perspective. And what we're comfortable showing is him being open to that. That doesn't mean he embraces it or that he starts, praying on the battlefield. There's none of that because we just can't prove that did happen. We do suggest that he was open to it, that of course he would have lived with knowledge of the Bible and the other great works of our culture. I mean, that was simply the time. We see that his father's being buried in a little church, obviously. So there's elements of faith. And then what I think I can say this without giving it away. There's a very powerful scene where a Native American chief who has fought with him and against him, I won't say too much, but he does express this sense that there is a creator watching over George, that there is a divine hand guiding him. And this is what I was alluding to earlier. And I think it's powerful to have that person, obviously not a Christian man, speak about the divinity of it all, by having witnessed the young Washington on the battlefield, sort of going into the wilderness and finding his way. And that way we bring in the element of providence and divine intervention without suggesting that George himself was a devout Christian in any way at that point. We just know, as you know, and I'm sure everybody's aware, that later in his life, of course, like all the founding fathers, they were Christians. Some of them were deists, some of them were firm believers. They would have known the Bible inside and out. It's one of the source documents of the Declaration, of course, and the Constitution. So there's no question about that. We try to sort of show where the seeds might have been planted when he was a teenager.
Yeah, no, I love that. Mission accomplished, Diederik, truly, to you and the entire team. I came in wanting to like the movie. I had high expectations. Honestly, and this is truly my assessment of it, just as someone who got to view it, the writing and the cinematography were just lights out fantastic. They really were. What you and Tom and John, I think all three of you contributed some writing to this. What you guys came to in that collaboration, especially, I'm thinking there's a pivotal moment in Washington's life where his mom comes in, shares some things with him. Just particularly powerful. What did it look like for three writers to work on one script, and how did you guys collaborate? We've got some young men who are listening in here who are looking at going into the film industry, who want to write, who want to tell stories. What does it look like to collaborate without the result feeling like it was written by a committee, as a lot of Hollywood scripts do? This one didn't.
They do. That's a good point, and thank you. Great compliment to receive. I would say start, and that's sort of a life lesson for me that I've been learning, still learning every day. Start from a place of humility. Say yes, and be open to opportunities that come your way. When I was approached by John Irwin and we decided to collaborate, that in itself was intimidating. This man has made some great films. He is, in my view, one of the visionaries we have working in Hollywood. He's also the rare person who has an idea, will then go write it, will then set up the production, will then direct it, will then edit it in post-production, and will be part of the marketing at the tail end.
Well,
so
that just underlines my take in that it seems like he's everywhere. You just confirmed he is.
Yes, that's how he works, and that's the beauty. He's a creative genius.
Yeah.
So when you have when you're lucky enough to work with a guy like that, you say yes, you sit down, and what we did was a kind of a unique process. Tom and I got into a room with John Irwin for several days, and we just listened to his vision for the film. And I will tell you, basically what you see on the screen was what he envisioned. We just didn't know it yet. John did. So he told us what he wanted to do. He laid out the story. We took notes, and Tom and I went away to write. And Tom and I are just good writers together. What I'll say on a practical level is that usually I do a first draft. I'm a quick writer. I like to sort of be an impressionist. Tom is a much more seasoned writer, has done a lot of films, and then takes my draft, works on that, hands it back. We pass it back and forth. At some point, John Irwin got back involved into that process again. And then that's how, so he was at the beginning, he was closer to the end of the writing process. And that's how we forged a script. I will say that we didn't quite literally sit in the same room, working on the same document, but we know each other's strengths very well. Some of each other's weaker spots perhaps as well. And so we believe that as a trio in this case, or Tom and I as a duo, can always benefit from working together and being open to criticism. You cannot be fragile. You cannot be too sensitive about feedback. That's a lesson that we all perhaps need to remember in today's culture as well. But I am so lucky to work with people like John and Tom. It's unbelievable, as you can imagine. And I'll tell you briefly that I was on the set in Ireland for a bit when they shot this in Virginia near the actual locations, and then in Ireland. Beautiful place. And it was movie magic because we had written that big opening scene that you've seen. We wrote that. We spent a lot of time on it. It was a complex piece to put together. And it so happened that Tom and I visited the set when they were filming it, in the middle of filming it. And I was very moved, and I look over, and Tom, who was a big, sturdy guy, was just weeping. He was crying. And I love that. Like, it was just very moving for us to be, and as you probably know, writers are often just pay to write something and then get out of the way. Like, don't talk to us anymore. And then all you can do is pray that it becomes a good movie. And in this case, we've been just part of the whole process up until now, as we're trying to get people to come to the theaters.
Oh, I love that. Thank you too. I mean, that's very appropriate for the thousands of men listening in here. As you may or may not be aware, Bucks is a national fraternity of Christian brothers we start in college, about 40 colleges nationwide, and then we've got tens of thousands of alumni and just other listeners listening in. Brotherhood is something we talk a lot about. So even just hearing about your partnership and your brotherhood in writing and in producing these films is really special. It strikes me too, Diederik, that's something you brought to this story. You show Washington as a young man forging those brotherhood bonds in some very difficult situations. I don't want to give away too much of the movie because it really is a major part of the journey. This is not Washington on the dollar bill just yet. I'm quite far from it. What were those aspects of brotherhood that you found with Washington and the other men with whom he initially served or led here in this story? You show it beautifully in the film.
Another excellent question. I think as I listened to you, I realized that growing up, I did not have a brotherhood. God, man, I wish I'd given something to be a part of yours, like to be in a group, in a community that you lead. That's very powerful. So kudos to you and all the men sharing that experience. It's powerful and it's important. And what Washington, I think, had for a little while was his big brother, who we lean into heavily. A beautiful acting role by John Foss, by the way. And I should call out William Franklin Miller, the actor playing George Washington. Sublime. He's never done a big role in anything before.
I wondered. I wouldn't have guessed that. He carried that movie. He really did. In fact, just to speak to the cast for everyone who's listening in and get them out to the theater, there was not a weak link in that cast at all.
Agreed.
Just very, very good. But yes, the man playing Washington's half brother is especially powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's John Foss. He lives up in Utah. I got to spend a little bit of time with him at the premiere in Nashville, and we created a fairly large, maybe a little bit outsized role for him in order to quickly start to show that bond between George and that big brother after having lost his father.
Yes.
And then we wanted to build on that and connected him with the British Colonel Gage. On the page, he was a little bit friendlier, a little closer to Washington than he is in the film. John took it a little bit different direction. That's totally his prerogative. We then have Christopher Gist, who was a historical character, a dear friend of George, where there's some tough decisions that George has to make with dire consequences. We created two more characters, and I love your question because I get to say that Henry and David Frisk. That's two characters who we came up with, just guys from Virginia, so that we could have a band of brothers, if you will. So I am very appreciative of you noticing that and pointing it out, because I think what makes the movie work is that throughout all the hardship and all the challenges and all the questions that he asks himself and his mother and God, he has those guys. That doesn't mean it's always easy, because at some point, as you know, he has to go to them and apologize for some things that have happened. So again, we show him as a flawed person, always to suggest we are all deeply flawed. We are all sinners. I don't need to tell you guys that, but for us to take him, someone said the other day at the premiere, like you took Washington out of the marble. And I liked.
Well said.
I like that expression.
Well said.
Like, he's alive. He's flesh and blood. He's in the mud. He cries. He screams. He laughs. And that band of brothers that allows us to really humanize him even more. And by the way, I do think it's a foreshadowing to the group of founding fathers, the 1776 period, because then you get a true band of brothers, the famous guys writing up this Declaration and into the Constitution. So we some of this is like a hint at what's to come, and the men around him are a very big part of that.
Oh, it's fantastic. A lot of the men who are listening in, these brothers who are tuning into Man to Men, about half of them are in their 20s and 30s. They've got some of that ambition left in them, and I think more than a few of them maybe feeling like their failures have already defined them. That's something that stood out in the film. Washington is 22 years old. And what happens at Fort Necessity could have ended him.
Yes.
In fact,
Yes.
you take us right up to the brink of that in the film in a very powerful way. But instead, that becomes the forge for really our first president. What do you want a young man who's listening to this right now or viewing the film to take from that, specifically as the man who has been a part of writing that story from the inside out?
I would say we are not our worst day. I say this to myself often, and I have no problem at this stage in my life to share that I've been deeply depressed. I've been on some medication for it. I have had very, very dark thoughts. This was mostly before I found my wife and found my way back to the faith. Many of us have had very, very bad worst days, and for some of us, it feels like they're still going on. And we do wonder if that's what defines us now. And without perhaps parents who support you, without a brotherhood, without a community around you, that it's very tempting to feel that way. And Jared, I think that movie that you're alluding to at the sort of the evening after the Ford necessity debacle, when it's nighttime and there's a fire and he prays, in my view. It's funny, as a writer, I can say, that was a scene without words, but it's probably my favorite scene in the movie because it is the most, it moves me to this day to see it. And you're right, we push him to the very brink, and he does go home and feel like, I am done. I am not fit to lead. I'll be a farmer, or maybe I'll just do whatever it takes to sort of no longer have a life of consequence. And that's where it is his mother and her faith who suggests to him, stay on that path. There is a path. You know what it is, and it's difficult. And he does say, what if I fail again? And his mother says, and this might be helpful to people. It is helpful to me while we wrote it and while I see it. And as I say it, she says, failure is a tutor sent by God. And this idea that you must learn from failures, whether it's in the moment or 10 years later, or I think I look at my father, he's almost 90, still around, thankfully. I think he's still learning lessons. And she also says, if you don't listen to God trying to teach you, then you fail twice. But if you do listen, you can gain wisdom. So on the other side of failure, there is wisdom. With wisdom, there is that path to your purpose. And it sounds a little grand, perhaps, but it has worked for me in the past. And I do think that the people around you, sort of not locking yourself up, but opening yourself up, if you can find it in yourself, is the key to it all.
I love that. Well, to wrap us up here, Diederik, a lot of Christian men may assume that faith-based screenwriting might mean, safe or sanitized or just almost just didactic, like it's just one step away from a lecture. Man, your work, your slate, and your own band of brothers, you guys are proving the opposite. I mean, there's spy thrillers, psychological dramas, torture, survival.
Yes.
Almost all of that is in Young Washington, come to think of it. But why does faith-driven storytelling need to go to the hard places to actually work? I think you do that beautifully, so let us in on that.
Yeah, so that's the idea, that faith, like life itself, is messy, is hard. Like, look at the Bible. None of that is easy or cheesy or, soft. There's nothing soft about the Bible and about those stories. And that's true for all. Look at Churchill, look at Lincoln, look at Washington. These men had hard lives and real lives and real problems. And it doesn't mean that they then overcome the problems and became perfect. Not at all. They were always imperfect men who did great things. But again, I do think that we can convey the values of our faith by being realistic, by being true to the source material, if you will. My kids are still fairly young, but we talk openly about the hard things because that's what I want them to know, that is what life is about. And again, that doesn't mean it defines us. It means that we're being realistic, as the founding fathers were. There was no utopia there. Yeah. And in part, I think that John Urban wanted to also say the realism of America is in this young life, is in this man. We see it in his life, and he carries it into the founding of the country. The last thing I'll quickly say, like, there are many moments in the movie that I enjoyed writing where he could have history could have gone so differently if his mother would have let him go to England. He desperately wanted to be British originally.
Right.
Or if he would have gotten a girl. He was in love with with sort of an upper class girl, and he was never going to get her because he was of the wrong station. Like, there are all these moments when history would have changed. I don't think people realize how close it got, but how perhaps it was again that divine hand saying, George, this is what you're not going to have. This is where you're not going to go, so that you can be here to help found the greatest country in the world, to bring it back to, this movie is not trying to be jingoistic, but we are proud of this country, and I think everybody should be.
Fantastic. Diederik Hoogstraten, thank you so much for just coming on the show today. Really an honor and a pleasure to talk to you, man. Big fan of your work, and congratulations on the film. It really is fantastic, and this is going to air in time for our guys to get out to the theater and see it. I hope someone will take their young sons. I got the privilege of that, and let me tell you, it was a gift as a father to now have this story and some of these scenes in my back pocket. We've already talked about some of it since we just saw it a couple days ago. So thank you for the work, man, truly.
That's an incredible thing to hear for us as writers. Thank you for having me, Jared. What a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes, well, best of luck on the film and on future endeavors, man.
Thank you.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, commonly referred to as Bucks. What if I told you that one of the most spiritually transformative places on a college campus might not be a church program or even a campus ministry, but a fraternity? That's Bucks. Everywhere, every day, Bucks men are raising families, leading in organizations, and strengthening churches to impact our communities for Christ. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's BOIX.org. We are produced here at Man to Men, rather well, I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. For Beta Upsilon Chi, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.